Next service we have Azure Bastion. So for Azure Bastion, how many of you maybe deployed or have nowadays something like a Jambox to facilitate the access to manage your resources? It's never a good idea in terms of security just to let anyone to directly access and control a VM. So it's always a good idea to have like a Jambox. So first you need to go to the Jambox, and from the Jambox you can connect to your servers. So with Azure Bastion, we simplified the process. So no longer need to deploy a VM or a Jambox yourself. So just deploy a Bastion instance, and through the Bastion instance, you can connect to either Windows or Linux VMs remotely. What I like about Azure Bastion is that everything takes place within your same browser session. So we'll just definitely take control of that Linux or server environment directly from your browser. So a couple of also nice features that we recently added for this is that now you can actually connect to VMs that are in different peer networks. So you have like VNet peerings to allow connectivity between different virtual networks. You can definitely just reach instances that are deployed in a different virtual network. We used to definitely have a requirement to deploy an instance per VNet, but now a single instance can definitely serve multiple VNets. And other nice feature is actually in preview is you can actually through Bastion you can now connect also to on-premises environments. You have like a server that is deployed on your local environment. You can try Azure Bastion now to connect remotely to those servers. So definitely you will need to have something like express route or site-to-site VPN, so you can definitely reach to that server over a private IP address and allow the connection. So that's what I have on this one. And what happens if this is more like a multi-region deployment, starting more complex? You have the resources deployed across different Azure regions. So in some cases, definitely as part of that business continuity, disaster recovery strategy, maybe you have something like that. So we have also services that support also those kind of deployments. So at the core of that, we definitely like to improve the performance of those workloads. You can definitely rely on Azure CDN. You can also use something like Azure Firewall. And if you would like to definitely make those workloads accessible over private IP addresses, you can definitely use something like Azure Private Link. And on top of that, definitely in terms of Zero Trust, kind of services that we can deploy, if you're looking to have that DDoS protection, you can definitely use that Azure DDoS protection standard, one we just covered. On top of that, if you would like to have like that layer 7 firewall, you can deploy application gateway and activate that web application firewall. Keep in mind that application gateway can only be deployed at a single region. So on top of that, if this is a multi-region deployment, you can deploy Azure Front Door that definitely has that capability to protect workloads that are deployed across different Azure regions. So let's explore a little bit Azure Front Door. So Azure Front Door has all those capabilities for those global or multi-region deployments. So a single instance can facilitate the access across resources that are hosted on multiple regions. What I like about this one is what you can have behind the scenes. You can have many things. You can have VMs. You can have platform as a service instances like web apps. You can have containers as well. So multiple things that can be behind the scenes. And Front Door just help us in this case to expose and make those workloads accessible over the internet. Also, you can definitely install a certificate on this device, and you can definitely do things like SSL offloading. You will looking to improve the performance, so have all those different capabilities enabled. And with a flip of the switch as well, you can enable that web application firewall on your Azure Front Door instance. So you can also have like a layer 7 firewall running side by side on that Azure Front Door. So a little bit more in depth about that web application firewall service that we have. Remember, we talked about Azure Firewall before. I said that definitely Azure Firewall is a layer 3 firewall. So it knows these blocks, opens, ports, and IPs. That's all it knows. Of course, you can also create like rules based on DNS names, but it's not a layer 3 firewall. So it cannot protect against SQL injection, cross-site scripting. So if you look into that kind of protection, you definitely need to rely on something like web application firewall. So web application firewall can be now available so far in 3 different services. First in application gateway Front Door and also in Azure CDN. And when you enable that web application firewall, it's basically a layer 7, an application firewall. So definitely will be able to protect you against those threats that are disclosed on that OWASP top 10 list of vulnerabilities. So things like SQL injection, cross-site scripting, all those different vulnerabilities will be basically mitigated by this device. So also has like that capability. You can tune definitely those policies you would like to enable, disable some of those controls coming from the OWASP definition. You can definitely play with those on that policy. And has also that integration with Azure Monitor. So all the logs are accessible through Azure Monitor. You'll definitely keep track of that. So how all those components definitely work together. So by hosting those resources in Azure, so typically how this works, so okay, I would like to make those resources accessible over the internet, so I will definitely need to have some sort of application firewall, so I can definitely enable that web application firewall at the level. If this is a multi-region deployment, I can definitely have something like front door that basically will be the device that basically is facing directly the internet. On the inner layer, remember, always a good idea to have like that hub of central VNet. On that hub VNet where all the traffic flows in first, you can definitely have that Azure DDoS instance deployed, and it will just not let all the traffic to hit those instances running on the backend. Remember, always the segmentation. So on the central VNet, you like to have things like Azure Firewall, or if this is definitely instances that are deployed in a specific region, why not? You can have a combination of another instance, something like Application Gateway, and also enable with that web application firewall as well. Remember that defense in depth. So multiple controls and different levels to protect your workloads. And also what happens if you have an hybrid model. So if you would like to have connectivity with a local environment, no problem. You can definitely have like that Azure VPN gateway or express route and facilitate that connectivity scenario to a local environment. But if the traffic is flowing from the local environment, one of the common mistakes on the traditional model is that, well, definitely just consider that corporate network as secure. So definitely we need to control. That's definitely never a good idea. In this case, remember, Zero Trust, all the traffic is always inspected and analyzed. So it doesn't matter if it's coming from a local environment. All the traffic flows into that hub VNet where it's analyzed, inspected. So every access request is always definitely identified, assessed, and analyzed. So what happens if those are resources that are accessible over the internet? No problem. You can definitely say have resources that are platform as a service that definitely will be accessible over the internet. So definitely first those resources on the hub VNet will definitely filter and let pass only the allowed traffic, those resources that maybe are deployed. Remember that segmentation in those different VNets where those resources are hosted. What happens on the other case, if those are platform as a service resources but are not accessible over the internet, no problem. You can also do that in Azure, and in this case you will use that private link. So with private link, you can still connect and access those platform as a service instances, but those are exposed to private IP addresses on this model. So that's what we have on this scenario. What I like about this diagram is that definitely that synergy of all of those components and following those principles that we talk about. Remember, we have all those microsegments. In this case, all the workloads are basically deployed in different VNets. That's how that segmentation is applied. So a couple of resources. First, let's take a closer look to one of those stories. So we have a customer, we heard about the little potato company, and they actually implemented and adopted Zero Trust. And in this case, they're mainly using Azure Active Directory, and they have actually like an always-on VPN. So when users connect, I would definitely like to remotely work. They definitely use that Azure VPN, and all they need to do in this case, authenticate using with that account coming from Azure AD, that definitely help them to adopt Zero Trust, but still keep those users productive when they're working remotely. So let me show you this in action. Let's start with a demo for the network and infrastructure piece. So let's go to the Azure portal. On the Azure portal, let's explore one of those resource groups. So definitely this will depend how you organize your resources. You can have one or multiple resource groups, definitely depending how's your management model. So you have multiple teams, a single team that need to manage or interact with different types of resources. In this case, for simplicity, I have multiple types of resources under the same resource group. So under the resource group, you will just definitely organize those resources by type. You see there on the top, I have API connections, I have web app, just definitely organized by type of service. So let's concentrate for now on one of those virtual networks. So you have that central VNet, hub VNet, and after that I have different VNets where the workloads are actually deployed. So let's explore that hub VNet. So we go to that hub VNet. You can have one or multiple address spaces and subnets inside the VNet. So now we actually have a single device that is connected inside this hub VNet. What it is actually that firewall. So if I click here on firewall, this will show me that Azure Firewall instance that is deployed on that central VNet. So on that hub VNet, if I have this firewall, in Azure Firewall, you can build 3 types of rules. You can build those typical NAR rule connections to the translation between public and private IP addresses. You can create those network rule connections that basically you can build those rules based on IP addresses and ports. And that application rule collection, as you want to remember and mentioned, you can actually use DNS names to build the definition of those rules. So for now, let's explore that network rule collection of that rule known as allow KMS. So let's take a look. So this actually, you see, have a priority, I have a name, and you can definitely build that definition on the typical actions like to allow or deny the traffic, and you just build the logic of the source and the destination. So in this case, you see that network rule, kind of the typical ones you have on a firewall. You define the source and the destination, and you have in this case the source, a specific network segment, the destination, a specific IP address, and a specific port that I will allow in this case the traffic to flow and reach that destination. So that's what I have on that definition. Just definitely always seeing those principles applied, multiple network segments, in this case on that central hub VNet, I have that firewall instance that controls the traffic that flows to the other VNets. So let's take a closer look. Let's go back to the hub VNet. And now let me briefly show you what I have in Azure Sentinel. All right, so I just show you how those principles are applied with that hub VNet and an instance of Azure Firewall deployed on that central VNet. So a couple of important topics. Let me show you also a living instance. Maybe you heard about Azure Sentinel, is security, identity, and event management. Let's explore Azure Sentinel in action. So there's an instance of Azure Sentinel, and Azure Sentinel in this case proactively can help us to identify all those incidents you see from a central dashboard. I can have the visibility of the events and the incidents that they were proactively identified by Azure Sentinel, and even actually has like a map from where actually those malicious threats or events were originated. So let's take a closer look to one of those incidents. So we go to incidents, to in this case proactively identify all those different security incidents, correlating all those events. Let's choose the first one, impossible travel activity. So let's say you connected from the US and 5 minutes later with the same account, there was a request made from a different continent. So impossible to make that travel in just 5 minutes. So in this case, it spotted this incident for me, and you see there on the right, you have more details about this incident. So what I like about Sentinel, definitely correlate all those events coming from different sources, so coming from Azure AD, coming from Cloud App Security, coming from Microsoft Defender, and we'll definitely, once you correlate those events, we'll be able to spot those incidents for me. So in this case, I have some events, I have an alert, and I have in this case the entities related to this incident. So I have like the account, the IP addresses, and to which resource or service that request was made. So scroll down, let's take a closer look to all the other details I have on this incident. You can actually have like that detailed view, exactly the other rule and more details about that specific incident. I can definitely take a closer look if I would like to. For now, let me show you, let's explore those connectors. So that's actually how Azure Sentinel ingests all the data that is proactively analyzed. So in this case, I have connectors, so multiple instances that can be connected with Azure Sentinel. So it could be Azure AD, could be Azure Identity Protection, could be Azure Firewall, could be, of course, Web Application Firewall, Azure Information Protection, many things that can be easily connected here. In this case, let's explore that connector for AWS. So yeah, I can definitely explore the connector of AWS. I can just ingest all that authentication, authorization information coming from there. So explore this incident. I can definitely take a closer look just to highlight that multiple connectors, and after that, Sentinel will be able to correlate all those events to spot proactively those security incidents. What I like about also Azure Sentinel is that it's not a just engine that can proactively identify those incidents, it can actually automate the response as well. So to automate response, we have something that is known as a playbook. So we go to playbook. Actually, this is powered by Azure Logic Apps. Definitely, this is a workflow-based platform that can help me to automate the response. So I can definitely have those playbooks. Actually, if proactively one of those incidents is identified, you can automate the response as well with one of those playbooks. So it's actually just to give an idea, those playbooks that I have available on this instance. Just to finish this module, some key takeaways. First of all, definitely try to follow that defense in depth approach. Definitely try to use all those services that you have available for you. Definitely need to build for yourself from scratch all that logic. Try to use Azure AWS, Azure Firewall, all those different services that already will help you to have those controls applied at each one of those different layers. Secondly, definitely keep in mind that every Azure virtual network and should not be accessible directly over public IP addresses. That definitely is the default behavior, but never definitely should keep like that. Definitely make sure that those resources are accessible through public IP addresses only when you have something like Azure Firewall or a layer 7 firewall that protects the access to those resources. Also important that if you have applications or APIs that maybe can be basically affected by those layer 7 definitely security threats, make sure definitely have like a layer 7 firewall that can protect against those security risks. Definitely something like web application firewall to protect all your web apps, container, APIs, whatever it is, definitely all those threats that can affect you at that level. Important also that to access and connect to your VMs hosted in Azure, never a good idea to just allow to connect those VMs directly over public IP addresses. Try to use that Jambox, or when not, use Azure Bastion. That definitely simplifies that model to connect to all your VMs from a central place, and those VMs are always accessible only through private IP addresses. And the last one is definitely very important. Definitely keep in mind, even if those are platform as a service instances like web apps, Azure storage accounts, whatever it is, by default, definitely those resources would be accessible over public IP addresses, but you can definitely use something like Azure Private Link, and with Azure Private Link, you can consume and access those resources, but only using private IP addresses coming from your own VNet. So definitely try to use that as much as possible. That will help us to follow those guidelines coming from Zero Trust. So this concludes Module 4. We'll take a quick 10-minute break and begin our final module and case study. Last module, we'll start covering what is the definition of a maturity model, and after that, we'll explore how Microsoft internally evolved and adopted a Zero Trust strategy. So let's start with Module 5. So let's cover the Zero Trust maturity model and the case study, how we adopted Zero Trust at Microsoft. So let's explore first what is a maturity model. So maturity model is basically a way to measure the improvement of the progress in a particular discipline or process. So if we take a look of a typical maturity model, we can definitely say we have 5 stages, and on the first stage typically refer as the ad hoc. And the ad hoc is when we're maybe doing things in a repeatable way, maybe somehow documented, but we cannot always obtain the same result or the same outcome consistently. The second stage, repeatable, is we definitely can follow exactly the same process and we can ensure some sort of consistent outcome out of that process. On the control, we can definitely consistently follow the same set of steps and always obtain the same outcome after that process. On the management one, also consistently obtaining always the same outcome following the process, but in this case, we'll start also to see ways how we can be more effective, how we can definitely identify ways to improve the process as well. And on the last one, optimize, in when we fully definitely mature over the process, I will definitely follow the same set of processes and making sure that definitely those processes and the outcome is aligned with the business process as well to definitely maximize the value coming out of that cycle, and definitely always try to find ways to be more effective, find ways to improve the process itself, and also maybe to be innovative on that process. So that's kind of a typical 5-level stage maturity model. So in terms of zero trust, at Microsoft we developed a maturity model for zero trust. And in this case we have 3 stages. On the first stage we have the traditional, definitely this when we'll just start adopting maybe zero trust, or we have no zero trust knowledge or a strategy allowed. So definitely we just like to get started and maybe try to have maybe more control over the identities, over the devices. So definitely just the starting point. After that, as we start adopting those zero trust principles, we can definitely move to a more advanced stage. That advanced stage, we definitely maybe have some control about the identities, the devices. Those requests are always authenticated at that level. So we can definitely start building that central policy based on those status definitely coming from the identity and the devices. We can definitely maybe have some control to which resources those accounts and devices have access to. And on the third stage, the optimal one, on the optimal, we fully definitely embrace and adopted zero trust. So definitely this is the optimal stage in which definitely we secure all those components. Remember, identities, devices, data, applications, the infrastructure and network. We're also definitely following like that micro-segmentation approach. And in this case, we're not just being reactive. So proactively, we use things like analytics, and we definitely in real time, we authenticate the sessions. We also identify anomalies in real time and also proactively automate the response. So that's definitely what we have on that optimal stage of the maturity model for zero trust. So we have actually built a tool that is available, and we have an assessment that you can actually take for free at the Microsoft site. So it's available at the link that we'll share with you, and also I will show you in a second how this assessment tool looks like. So let me show you that in action. So on this page, first we have Zero Trust Guidance Center. On these guidance centers, we definitely have like an overview of all those guiding principles of zero trust. Remember, 3 core principles: never trust, always verify explicitly every request made. Everyone needs to be authenticated and authorized. Secondly, use least privileged access, definitely just enough time, just in time access, and also assume breach. Those are the 3 principles, definitely how those are applied to all those different components we described before. If you go to this page, you see have the zero trust assessment. So the zero trust assessment, it will take you to this page that you can definitely start doing the assessment for free. So you can validate in which stage you are currently on that zero trust adoption model. So let's look for now. Let's go to identities. So go to identities, definitely just see like a series of questions. So have you enabled multi-factor authentication for internal users? So all users, some users, admin only, none. So let's say maybe some users. If I select next, I say which forms of passwordless authentication. So let's say maybe using FIDO keys, I'm using Microsoft Authenticator, and let's say we're using some sort of out tokens. After that, which of your user groups are provisioned with single sign-on? So let's say we have information workers and let's say vendors. Which of the following security policy engines are you using to make access decisions for enterprise resources? So using cloud access security broker, security information and event management, endpoint protection, mobile device management, security policy engine, basically from where all those signals are being generated and analyzed to make those access request decisions. So let's say you have cloud access security brokers and you have, let's say, endpoint protection in place. Have you disabled legacy authentication? Let's say typically we're still using that. So let's say have not disabled legacy authentication yet. Are you using real-time user and sign-in detection when evaluating access requests? Something like identity protection. Let's say we're still not using something like that. Which of the following technologies have you integrated with your identity and access management solution? So let's say we have endpoint protection and Microsoft device management. And let's say we're using some sort of conditional access. After that, which of the following context is used in your access policies. So what's a control plane? In this case, let's say we'll considering the users, application type, the location, and let's say we're using the user risk level. After that, you see our using identity, secure score for guidance. Let's say no, we're not using that. And I'm gonna click next. Basically, will tell me in which stage I'm in. So say basically you are on that stage, and basically to move to the advanced stage, we'll definitely take care of some recommendations. For example, implement multi-factor authentication, not just for information workers, but for all the user groups. Block legacy authentication, definitely protect identities against compromise, maybe use something like identity protection, so we can definitely analyze also sign-in and session risk assessments. Also improve your identity posture, so maybe use something like identity security score. So you can definitely follow those recommendations. If I select the next category, you can definitely continue, let's say, to endpoints, apps, infrastructure, data, network, and all the different components that are part of Zero Trust. So that's actually how this assessment looks like. So you have like that prescriptive guidance, which stage are you currently and what you need to do to take it to the next stage. So that's what we have available on that free assessment tool. So let's explore now our own journey, how Microsoft adopted and evolved over the years with that Zero Trust model. So maybe wondering, where do I start? So usually a good idea is to start with identities and devices. So typically those are the first steps when you're trying to definitely adopt Zero Trust. So as you can guess, let's try to do the most important things first. So first, actually before doing anything, just make sure you align with all your different teams. So in real life, you like to have different teams that have different responsibilities. Maybe you have people that just manage the network, you have teams that maybe just manage identity components, you have another team that manages applications, you manage other team that, let's say, takes care of the security piece, you have maybe the team that takes care of the compliance. So different teams, but overall definitely they all are definitely aligned in terms of security. So definitely they should be involved. So make sure first we drive that alignment. Definitely make sure, okay, keep in mind that Zero Trust involves all those different components. So all those different teams will be aligned. So first, definitely make sure everyone is on the same page. Definitely trying to build that Zero Trust strategy. Let's see kind of the challenges that we have and how maybe Zero Trust can help us to solve all those challenges that we currently experience. This will definitely help us to remember, you need to build that segmentation strategy. So how we will segment all those different workloads, maybe to facilitate all those operations around those. So once that's the first definitely thing, drive alignment. So once you definitely make sure everyone is on the same page. Secondly, definitely start with identity. So build that identity definitely based perimeter. Remember, identity is the control plane. So definitely block legacy authentication protocols. Let's try to use modern authentication. Let's try to use things like a conditional access. Let's try to use definitely multi-factor authentication. So typically those are the first steps. Let's make sure definitely have the identities protected. Secondly, that will be the important step. And the third one in this case, refine definitely network perimeter. Remember, always like that micro-segmentation. So definitely put all those workloads isolated in individual and specific network segments, definitely to contain the breach if something bad happens at some point of time. So those are the key essential steps that definitely we need to perform to adopt Zero Trust, and actually what worked for us, at least internally at Microsoft. So let's take a closer look to kind of the different priorities or services that can help us in this case as we're adopting Zero Trust. So first, what is important, as I said before, start with identity and devices. So first, definitely keep in mind, following those Zero Trust principles, every request needs to be authenticated and authorized. So you can definitely easily use something like Azure AD conditional access for that. So in terms of the user accounts, maybe try to leverage that passwordless approach, try to use definitely multi-factor authentication for all the users, and for the devices, definitely validate the healthy state of those devices, definitely using the like compliance first for configuration management of those devices. After that, definitely once you identify those devices and those accounts, how definitely let's try to protect also the resources that those devices and those accounts will have access to. So definitely secure first the key resources. So definitely in terms of applications, let me sure definitely those applications are registered in Azure AD, so we can leverage Azure AD to facilitate authentication to those resources. It will still have applications that rely on legacy authentication protocols. Let's use something like Azure AD App Proxy to facilitate and transparently publish those resources and make them accessible. In terms of data, I try to use definitely cloud app security to control how data in this case basically is accessible on the session level. If you have third-party applications or mobile devices that users are interacting with, you can definitely have the control of that level. Also can definitely use a combination of Microsoft information protection, make sure definitely the information is always encrypted and all those controls stay basically with the information. Additional definitely in terms of the governance piece, to definitely continuously monitor and proactively find those threats and automate the responses. You can definitely use something like Secure Score, definitely just to see overall what's the security posture. There's something specific that you need to do to improve that security posture on your environment. So that will be the kind of the three definitely priorities that we should do on that zero trust journey. So once we work definitely with identities and devices, after that, definitely modernize the security operations, definitely try to automate the responses. So definitely try to use things like Microsoft 365, Azure Defender. Of course, you would like to have like a single place to go and have that visibility. You can definitely use something like Azure Sentinel. Remember all those different connectors that you have available can definitely help me to have that visibility and automate response. And after that, definitely let's try to automate all those different things, reduce definitely the manual effort. So definitely remember those playbooks I showed you in Azure Sentinel. You can definitely start building those or build queries. So definitely whatever that can help us to proactively find those trends and automate the response once those security incidents are identified. Also, depending on your own scenario, some of you may be using IoT. We have definitely a solution for that. And basically to protect that operational technology piece for IoT devices, remember we have a solution, Azure Defender for IoT. So that will help us definitely to discover, protect, and monitor access to those IoT devices and help us to simplify the management of the security posture for those scenarios. Also for the data center and DevOps security, definitely would like to automate as you're building your own applications yourself and you're definitely using some sort of DevOps approach, you would like to definitely involve security in the process and definitely implement that DevSecOps. So as you build the applications, make sure definitely you're not adding any vulnerabilities on the applications you're building. Let's try to definitely make sure you're not using legacy authentication protocols. As you're building the code of those applications, you're using things like OAuth or OpenID Connect, definitely making sure that those applications are ready, for example, to work with multi-factor authentication. And definitely as those pipelines are being executed on your DevOps process, definitely can automate a lot of things. We can automate quality checks, we can automate security checks, definitely to be part of that strategy. So another also case study, maybe familiar name, Agent Block. So definitely they adopted a zero trust strategy and definitely adopted a lot of different tools I just showed you on the previous slide. What is definitely important for this scenario is actually that after just 2 weeks of work, they definitely were able to enable thousands of definitely tax professionals to secure definitely work from home. So definitely using Azure AD for authentication, definitely using that Azure VPN. So definitely always in just 2 weeks achieve that balance between productivity and security. So everyone in this case was able to securely connect and access those resources and definitely stay productive. So let's take a closer look to the case study. Let's see Microsoft's own journey adopting zero trust. So always start definitely with identity and devices. So there's definitely a before. So pre-zero trust. So before zero trust at Microsoft, not device management required. So basically you can use whatever device you would like. It could be corporate resources or it could be bring your own device. You can access all those corporate resources from those devices. What we use in this case to secure the accounts, single factor authentication, basically passwords. And third, definitely pre-zero trust, definitely that capability to enforce existing policies over identity. For example, make sure that those specific identities have access open to a set of different resources that definitely didn't exist before zero trust. So once we actually adopted zero trust, the first thing we started was with identities. With identities, kind of controls that we implemented. First, definitely all the user's account, definitely set up for strong identity enforcement, basically multi-factor authentication. Secondly, definitely strong identity enforcement for Office 365. So you would like to access any Office 365 related resource, you will need to definitely provide a multi-factor authentication successfully. Third, definitely the least privileged user rights, definitely try to segment those privileges and automate that process. At some point of time, anyone requests higher privileges, we can grant you those privileges but temporarily and be automated that process. And the last one definitely, and that's actually was recently introduced, we eliminate passwords. So definitely passwords is not definitely an effective mechanism to protect accounts. In some cases, what we can do, we actually tend to reuse passwords. And it's definitely not a good way. So actually we just eliminated passwords. We actually used to request to make a password change every month, but after zero trust, I think actually the policy is actually you need to update your password every 2 years. So definitely is not, what definitely rely in this case is on that multi-factor authentication. So definitely on biometric controls. Definitely use Windows Hello, or we use the Microsoft Authenticator to definitely rely on those for authentication. And of course, in some cases, I know we're piloting also those FIDO keys for passwordless as well. A lot of cases we're using just the Microsoft Authenticator app for that passwordless authentication. So that was the first step. After we secured identities, then we definitely continue with the devices. So with the devices, definitely we make sure that definitely the device health state is verified. You would like to access SharePoint, Exchange, and Teams either on Windows, Mac OS devices or iOS, Android devices. So definitely would like to use, for example, Teams on my personal device. I would definitely make sure in this case through the Microsoft Defender solution that my personal device is in a safe state. So validate things like I'm running on the latest update of iOS and I have like an anti-malware solution. So definitely validate that the healthy state of the device in order to let access to those different resources. Additional, definitely use data for application and services, definitely leverage all that telemetry that is being captured by all those different solutions to analyze and continuously definitely identify any issues on the state of those devices. Remember that those rules are not static, so if at some point of time one of those devices is no longer healthy, then basically you cannot longer be able to connect from that device. And the last one, please, definitely the device management is required for all those tier network access. We have like definitely information that is highly confidential. If you would like to access to those resources, you definitely in this case we need to connect from a device that definitely has a different set of restrictions or requirements. So once we secure identities devices, next one definitely was to verify access. So definitely internet only for specific users, definitely establishing solutions for all those unmanaged devices. So what happens, you would like to bring your own device, you could do it, but you will limit to the set of resources that you will be able to connect from those type of devices. Definitely also apply that least privileged access, just in time access, just enough access. Definitely try to reuse all those accounts that maybe have those privileged roles to interact with those services. And the last, definitely device health required. It doesn't matter if you're on a wired or wireless connection, but if you have access to corporate network, definitely using something like VPN, then guess what? Definitely your device needs to be on a healthy state. And at the last stage, definitely is verify those services. So definitely continues, definitely grow the coverage in terms of the requirements of the healthy state of the device to connect with different set of resources. And now actually we're conducting like a proof of concept of the service health concept, definitely how to specific services, which kind of requirements will be specific for each service depending on the devices and the identity. So we should definitely piloting that for now. Keep in mind that behind the scenes, all those controls and those mechanisms definitely use, of course, Azure AD, conditional access, all those things I showed you before. And Also at the bottom, we always rely definitely on all the telemetry that is captured around user and access. Definitely as users trying to authenticate and access those resources, we definitely keep track of all that telemetry. So we'll see which kind of devices, from which country, which type of applications typically you interact with. So anything that's outside that baseline, they will definitely help us to spot those anomalies. So let's explore that evolution. So first, let's go from that typical flat network. So you have a single network segment where all those servers and resources are deployed to on the corporate environment. So nowadays, definitely have like maybe users are interacting with third-party applications, cloud-based applications, using different types of devices for that. So how this works? So we'll just let all the corporate devices basically access all those applications, access those resources. So usually the first step is, you know what? Let's definitely validate first those identities and those devices. So let's differentiate those devices that maybe are corporate devices and are under our control. Let's maybe define also those bring your own devices, maybe devices that are not under our control. Let's make sure in this case that the first step, only those devices that are managed, or maybe those devices that are definitely bring your own device, are on a healthy state. So only will you definitely pass those validation steps, then you will be able to access to those managed corporate resources. First, just establishing that boundary, that first segment, to which resources you will be allowed to connect. So not the entire network, just to that specific segment. After that, next step on that evolution, that will be all applications maybe are accessible over the internet, but first we need to validate that identity and that device that is used to connect to those applications. If definitely maybe users are connecting over VPN, we definitely be some sort of mechanisms that need to be verified to allow that connection to those resources on the internal network. Next step will definitely to build all those microsegments, remember, all around definitely containing the breach. So at some point of time, breach affect us, make sure definitely that all those workloads are organized in its own microsegment. So in this case, typical segments, how we'll definitely split the network. So definitely maybe first, typical, we have like at least 3 categories. The first segment, business critical, definitely information that is highly sensitive. Second, maybe have using some sort of IoT, maybe high impact IoT and low impact IoT. So at least have those 3 different segments. We have definitely have specialized segments, and definitely depending on the state of the identities, the accounts and the devices will definitely have access to a specific set of different resources depending on definitely on all those signals. And in some cases could be also depending which location you're connecting from, which kind of device is healthy, not healthy, which account, then you will have access to just a specific set of those resources. So how we can make zero trust a reality? So remember always the first steps start with definitely identity and devices, and in terms of that, Azure AD conditional access can definitely help you a lot. Remember, zero trust is all about having that central policy where all those different signals are analyzed, and based on those signals, will allow or deny access to those resources on the other end. So with Azure conditional access, you can simplify the process, multiple signals that can be used to control access to resources. In Azure AD, you can enable multi-factor authentication with a flip of a checkbox inside conditional access. After that, definitely in terms of the devices as well, you can require multi-factor authentication, so definitely in a highly regulated, depending to which segment you're connecting, definitely this is a highly regulated, then definitely let's make sure that MFA is always required. After that, definitely good, and the starting steps definitely is always maybe see the relationship with those questions on the assessment. So definitely block legacy authentication, require also just not the state also just that the account passes a successful authentication and authorization, but also validate the compliance state of the device as well. So you can combine those things to make a decision, and after that to specifically concentrate on the risk level of the user itself. You can use Azure AD identity protection. You have 2 levels of risk: user risk level and session or signing level. So definitely you can control the risk at those levels and automate a response. To simplify also the management of those devices, you can use Intune. So with Intune, they can definitely build those policies and validate basically which controls are required to make sure that the device is in a compliant state. So that's kind of definitely will over the time we can definitely implement all those controls and adopt and fully embrace zero trust. We can definitely go from that traditional to advanced and eventually to that optimal stage for that maturity model. So let me show you this in action. Let's go over the first demo for the identity and risk and user experience. So let's say I have an account. I will be using that account of Nestor. So with this account, I'm connecting to resources of this fictitious company with root bank. So I use Nestor accounts to connect those resources. So accessing those resources, I put in my password. But let's say in this case, I'm connecting from an unknown location, and this will analyze that security level. So first, I will get the multi-factor authentication prompt. I will definitely need to go to my phone and approve that on the Microsoft Authenticator. After that, if this is an unknown location, unknown type of device, then definitely identify that this is a risk assignee. And because this is a risk assignee, automatically in this case, it will request to make a password change. So I will need to change my password. So first, I need to type in the current password, and after that, I need to type in the new password. Definitely, you need to have all those complexity requirements. Just type in the password and sign in eventually, because I was identified that this is a risk assigning. And there it is. So once you successfully, in this case, change the password, then I can navigate across all those different resources. Behind the scenes, all of this is powered by Azure AD Identity Protection and Conditional Access. Let me show you now how we can definitely apply those zero trust principles for application and data. So in this case, I have a mobile device. So say in a mobile device, I receive an email. I also under Nestor's account, I receive an email. Let's say this is a bank, so I receive a document that is highly confidential, and in this case, this is a loan application. So I go to that email, I have like that new release of guarantee form. I go to the document, and definitely this is what users will need to provide. And when I go into this document, you see definitely have some errors, and maybe would like to take a look on this later on. So I will just go and copy some sections of that document from my phone. I would like to paste that on a note. I would like to take a closer look to this later on. So I'll go to section 2, copy the contents, go to notes, and I would like to paste that. Guess what? I cannot do it. So why is that? Because I'm using Microsoft Information Protection. In this case, the data is actually encrypted, and the access level of that will depend also, in this case, in a combination with Microsoft Cloud App Security, will depend also on the application that I'm using. So as I'm using Microsoft Outlook and I'm using the Microsoft Word mobile application, is good, but I'm using in this case the Notes application. The Notes application in this case is not authorized to interact with that level of confidentiality of the information. So we'll see your organization's data cannot be posted here. So this is not an authorized application. It will not work. So let's say I would like to share that with another teammate. So I go back to the Outlook application. I will try to send that. So I will send this to another user within the same organization. So I will send that, just type in directly from the address book, find another user, and we'll set the document. And you can see in this case directly from the email message, I can type in the content, I can paste it, no problem, because this is an application that allows me in this case to handle that confidential information inside of it. So in this case, you see the content will appear in here. Let's see also a couple of examples what will happen in this case for the scenario of working with documents. So I go, let's say, to first document, and this is just a document that has public level of access. So it's actually, let's say, it's a bank annual full drive. So I would like to maybe share this with some friends. So no problem, this is public domain information. So I would like to, I can actually download a copy of this document, and I can actually share this freely because it's just public domain information. But what happens, let's say I have other types of documents. So say in this case, I have like a loan application. So go to that Word document of the loan application, and I open that on Outlook, open up that on the Word application. See, opening browser, opening app. Let's open up directly in the Word application. Guess what? In this case, automatically, this document was labeled and classified as highly confidential. Basically, it's encrypted, and a set of different permissions are applied to this document because it matches specific criteria. So actually, the controls there on the left, I'm not able in this case to copy and paste. All those controls are already disabled because of the level of confidentiality of this document. Actually, you see even like a watermark is applied to the document. So that's actually in this case how those principles are automatically applied behind the scenes, powered by Microsoft Information Protection and Microsoft 365. So definitely that's how we apply those zero trust principles. So that will be the end of the demo, and that will be the end of the content of that last module that we have for today. This concludes Microsoft Security Virtual Training Day Zero Trust event. Let's recap all the content that you have seen. So first, we started with what is zero trust. After that, we talk about those principles applied to identity and devices. After that, zero trust principles applied to applications and data. After that, those principles apply for infrastructure and network. And on this last module, we just cover the zero trust maturity model, and we learn from Microsoft's own evolution adopting zero trust. Thank you for attending, and we hope you enjoyed these sessions.